The rain had started as a gentle whisper against the windshield, a soothing soundtrack for Jenna's late-night drive through the winding backroads of northern Oregon. She'd rented a secluded cabin for the weekend, hoping the isolation and endless forest would untangle the stress of her job in Portland. When she finally pulled into the gravel driveway of Ashwood Cabin, the rhythmic patter on the roof felt almost hypnotic. The cabin looked quaint and inviting, its porch light casting a warm glow on the surrounding pines. Yet something about the dense, shifting shadows between the trees seemed heavier than just a stormy night. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Jenna dropped her overnight bag on the couch, lit the fireplace, and opened a bottle of wine she'd been saving. The rain intensified, turning from a whisper to a soft drumming against the wooden walls. She found herself listening intently, as though the rain carried a subtle melody, one that rose and fell, sometimes almost human in its cadence. Laughing at her own imagination, she settled into an armchair by the fire and let the flickering flames lull her into a sense of peace. Around midnight, a single, deliberate knock echoed from the front door. It wasn't the creak of wood or a branch striking the siding. It was a sharp, measured sound, utterly distinct from the rain. Jenna froze, her glass of wine halfway to her lips. The cabin was miles from the nearest town, and the only neighbor was a closed-up summer home 2 miles down the road. Slowly, she stood, her pulse thudding in her ears, and approached the door. Through the peephole, she saw nothing but darkness and the sheen of rain pooling on the pea. She waited, holding her breath, convinced she had imagined it. But the knock came again, 3 evenly spaced raps, firm but not aggressive. "Hello," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. The rain seemed louder now, masking any distant noises that might give her clues. No reply came, no movement outside, only the persistent sound of water rushing through the gutters. Jenna's hand hovered over the deadbolt, debating whether to open the door, when a third knock rattled the wood, this time closer to the ground, as if someone were crouching. Jenna backed away and grabbed her phone, only to see that there was no signal. She flicked on the porch light again, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was out there, but the bulb flickered and died, plunging the porch into darkness. The only illumination came from the firelight behind her and the dim reflection of rain streaking down the window panes. Somewhere outside, between the rustling trees and the relentless rain, something shifted. The forest had swallowed the sound whole, leaving Jenna staring at the door, a hollow unease settling deep in her chest. The rain didn't let up. If anything, it seemed to fall harder, the drumming on the roof now a steady roar that swallowed up every other sound. Jenna sat rigid on the armchair, her eyes fixed on the front door. Minutes passed, 10, maybe 15, before she finally exhaled. Maybe it had been a tree branch, or her nerves playing tricks on her. Yet the knocks had been too precise, too deliberate. Her wine glass sat untouched on the coffee table, a crescent-shaped smear of condensation forming beneath it, and the fire crackled softly, a fragile pocket of warmth against the storm outside. She decided to distract herself. Pulling a wool blanket over her shoulders, Jenna turned on a small radio she'd found on the cabin's shelf, hoping for some comforting music. Static greeted her, but then, faintly, a local weather broadcast came through. Heavy rains and possible flash flooding tonight in the Ashwood area. Residents are advised to stay indoors. The voice faded in and out, distorting oddly, as if the storm itself were pressing against the signal. She turned the volume down and glanced toward the curtained window beside the fireplace. For a moment, she was sure she saw a shadow pass by, too close to the glass to be a tree swaying. Jenna's heart kicked up again. She grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter and crept toward the window. Lifting the edge of the curtain, she aimed the beam into the night. The light illuminated the porch railing, the slick driveway, and the glistening trunks of the nearest pines. Nothing moved. But then, beneath the sound of the rain, came the faintest crunch of gravel, like footsteps, slow and measured, circling the cabin. She turned off the flashlight instinctively, as though its glow might attract attention, and stepped backward into the safety of the firelight. The cabin's walls felt suddenly thin, the rain like static interference masking whoever, or whatever, might be outside. Jenna's mind searched for rational explanations. A lost hiker? A prankster? But this wasn't the kind of place people stumbled upon by accident. She tried her phone again, still no signal. She even considered running to her car, but the thought of fumbling with keys in the dark while someone lurked in the rain made her stomach turn. Instead, she lit a second candle and placed it on the kitchen counter, telling herself that more light would make her feel safer. Another sound broke through the storm, a soft scrape at the back door, like fingernails dragging across the wood. Jenna's breath caught. She spun toward the sound, heart pounding so loud she could almost hear it over the rain. The scrape came again, longer this time, and accompanied by the faint creak of the porch steps. Whoever was out there wasn't leaving. And then, unmistakably, came a low, deliberate knock from the back door. 3 raps, spaced exactly like before. Jenna backed toward the living room, the fire casting her shadow against the walls, and realized she was no longer sure which door would be safer to guard. The rain's steady hiss became an oppressive wall of sound, drowning out everything except Jenna's own heartbeat. She gripped the flashlight so tightly her knuckles ached, glancing between the front and back doors. The knock hadn't come again, but the silence between the downpour now felt unnaturally heavy, like the world outside was holding its breath. She inched closer to the back door, half expecting another scrape, but the only movement was her reflection in the small window above the handle. A part of her wanted to believe she'd imagined it all, but her gut insisted otherwise. Determined not to be cornered, Jenna decided to check her surroundings from a safer vantage point. She climbed the narrow staircase to the loft, which overlooked both the living room and the front porch through a small upper window. The flashlight's beam wavered across the rafters and cedar walls as she reached the window. Outside, the forest stretched into blackness, a tangled mass of pine trunks and rain-slick leaves. For a long moment, nothing stirred, until a faint glimmer of movement caught her eye. Near the tree line, a figure, a pale suggestion of human form, seemed to shift between 2 pines, then vanish entirely. Jenna's breath fogged the glass as she leaned closer. Another flicker, this time farther to the left, like someone circling, deliberately staying at the edge of visibility. She fumbled for the small pair of binoculars left on a shelf, no doubt meant for birdwatching. Through the lenses, the trees swam into sharper focus. At first, she saw only rain and branches. Then, for the briefest heartbeat, a face emerged, pale, featureless in the poor light, but unmistakably watching her. The instant she blinked, it was gone, leaving only dripping leaves and shifting shadows. A sudden, hollow bang echoed from below, the sound of something knocking over in the kitchen. Jenna nearly dropped the binoculars. She scrambled down the loft stairs, the wooden steps creaking beneath her. The kitchen light flickered as she entered, casting elongated shadows across the floor. The second candle had been snuffed out, its wax still warm. The back door remained locked, but faint muddy streaks led from the threshold toward the rug near the sink, too far inside for just rainwater. She knelt and touched the rug. It was damp and cold. Fear prickled up Jenna's spine. Someone had been inside, or still was. She scanned the room with her flashlight, every corner feeling suddenly foreign and unsafe. The fire had burned lower, plunging the cabin into deeper shadows. A floorboard creaked overhead in the loft she had just left. Her chest tightened. She wasn't alone anymore. As she backed slowly toward the front door, her mind raced. Should she risk the storm and flee, or barricade herself inside and hope the intruder didn't return? Outside, the rain surged harder, as if urging her to stay put. Yet the dark forest might not be the greater danger anymore. Jenna's breathing came in shallow bursts as she pressed her back against the front door, her flashlight darting between the kitchen and the stairs. The muddy footprints on the rug hadn't been there minutes ago. Either someone had slipped inside unnoticed, or something far stranger was happening. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the sound of distant, breaking branches. The rain battered the windows so fiercely that every gust of wind sounded like footsteps racing across the porch. Somewhere above, in the loft, a faint floorboard creaked again. Soft but deliberate, she swallowed her panic and decided she couldn't just wait. Creeping forward, she picked up the iron poker from beside the fireplace. A poor weapon, but better than her bare hands. Each step toward the staircase seemed unbearably loud over the rain. The loft above was cloaked in darkness, save for a faint orange glow from the dying fire below. As Jenna placed her foot on the first stair, another sound, a soft, irregular tapping, echoed from overhead. It reminded her of fingers drumming on wood. Playful and patient halfway up the stairs, Jenna froze. The tapping stopped. She strained her ears, but the storm masked everything beyond a few feet. She reached the top and swept her flashlight across the loft. The beam illuminated the small bed under the slanted ceiling, a wooden desk piled with dusty maps, and the binoculars on the windowsill, right where she'd left them. Nothing seemed disturbed, but as she turned toward the railing, her breath caught. A shape, a tall, thin silhouette, flitted past the edge of her vision and disappeared behind the stairwell. Jenna lunged toward the railing and aimed her flashlight downward. The living room was empty, shadows dancing across the walls from the flickering fire. She darted her light across the kitchen, the front door, the back door. Everything seemed as it had been. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, and for a fleeting second, she wondered if the storm and isolation were warping her senses. But then she noticed the binoculars again. This time, lying flat on the desk, their straps swinging slightly, as if someone had just set them down. A crash shattered the tension. The radio had fallen from the shelf below, smashing on the floor. The static hissed loudly, then went silent. Jenna bolted down the stairs, poker raised, but the living room was empty. The broken radio pieces lay scattered, the cord still plugged into the wall. Outside the window, lightning illuminated the trees, and for the briefest moment, a pale figure stood at the edge of the forest, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. By the time the thunder rolled and the darkness returned, the figure was gone, but Jenna knew now it was real. Jenna stood frozen at the base of the stairs, her grip on the fireplace poker slick with sweat. The broken radio's silence was worse than the static had been. It was a void, a reminder that she was cut off entirely. The rain pounded harder, hammering the roof and windows as if trying to drown her thoughts. She forced herself to move, to think. The doors were still locked. The windows were shut. Yet muddy footprints had appeared inside, and something, or someone, had moved her binoculars. Lightning flickered again outside, briefly illuminating the pale figure among the trees, and she caught herself whispering aloud, "What do you want from me?" The wind pushed against the cabin, making the walls groan. Jenna remembered the emergency phone in the utility shed out back. The property listing had mentioned it as a backup in case of outages. She had dismissed it earlier, but now it might be her only hope. Grabbing her coat, she tightened the blanket around her shoulders and glanced at the front door. The storm was violent, but staying inside with an intruder, or worse, felt unbearable. She slowly turned the deadbolt, flinching at every creak, and cracked the door open. The scent of wet earth and pine rushed in, sharp and cold. She darted out into the storm, the rain instantly soaking her hair and coat. The flashlight beam struggled against the sheets of water, barely illuminating the gravel path that wound behind the cabin toward the shed. Every shadow between the trees seemed to shift and breathe. As she reached the corner of the cabin, a sound rose above the storm, a low, drawn-out groan, like wood under immense pressure. It wasn't the cabin. It was farther out, near the trees. She swallowed hard and kept moving, her boots splashing in shallow puddles. The shed loomed ahead, its tin roof rattling under the downpour. She yanked the door open and stepped inside, water streaming down her coat. The beam of her flashlight revealed shelves of tools, a workbench, and the promised emergency phone mounted on the wall. Relief flooded her chest as she reached for the receiver, until she noticed the cord had been cut cleanly, the frayed end dangling like a severed nerve. Before she could react, a loud slam echoed behind her. The shed door had swung shut. The rain's sound dulled, replaced by the heavy thump of footsteps just outside. Jenna's pulse spiked. She killed her flashlight and pressed her back against the wall, straining to hear through the storm. The footsteps circled the shed slowly, splashing through puddles with deliberate intent. Then they stopped, right outside the door. A moment of silence stretched, fragile and endless, before a single, deliberate knock came. 3 even raps, identical to the ones on her cabin doors. The sound reverberated through the small space, impossibly loud over the rain. Jenna clenched the poker in both hands, her breath shallow, and understood with chilling clarity. Whoever was outside wasn't trapped in the storm. They were hunting her in it. The storm outside raged like a living thing, pounding against the shed's walls. Jenna didn't dare move. The knock's echo still vibrated through her chest, and she could almost feel a presence lingering just beyond the thin wooden door. She waited, straining her ears over the drumming rain, but the footsteps didn't return. After what felt like minutes, though it might have been seconds, she slowly reached for the door handle. Her palms were slick, both from rain and sweat, and the poker trembled slightly in her other hand. She eased the door open just an inch. The flashlight revealed a stretch of muddy ground, glistening under the storm. But the footprints were gone. Not washed away, simply gone, as though whoever was there had never existed. Lightning briefly illuminated the tree line, but nothing stirred. Her breathing quickened. She backed out of the shed, her boots squelching in the mud, and began edging toward the cabin, her flashlight cutting a narrow cone through the darkness. Halfway back, something caught her eye. On the cabin's porch, just below the front window, a fresh handprint smeared across the glass. The streak glistened in the lightning's flash, unmistakably human and larger than Jenna's own. She stepped closer, her heartbeat hammering. There was something odd about it. The fingers seemed unnaturally long, and the angle suggested whoever had left it was crouched low, peering in. The rain couldn't have created that shape. Whoever had been circling the cabin had watched her from less than a foot away. Jenna bolted inside, slamming and locking the door behind her. She dragged a heavy wooden chair under the handle and another in front of the back door. The poker felt inadequate now, a child's toy against something that could vanish without leaving prints. She glanced at the clock on the mantel, 2:47 a.m. The fire had nearly burned out, plunging the room into a colder darkness. She lit another candle and set it on the windowsill, the flame flickering weakly against the storm's assault. For a fleeting moment, Jenna considered that maybe it wasn't a person at all. The pale face in the trees, the vanishing footprints, the perfectly timed knocks, it all felt calculated, but in a way that didn't fit any ordinary intruder. Her gaze drifted back to the smeared handprint on the porch window. The rain hadn't washed it away yet. As she stared, lightning split the sky once more, and she saw, just for an instant, another handprint appearing on the opposite side of the glass, fingers dragging slowly downward. By the time the thunder followed, the window was empty again. The candle on the windowsill sputtered violently, its flame bending under an invisible draft. Jenna's knuckles whitened on the poker as she scanned the cabin. The knock didn't come again, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the air inside had changed, thicker, colder, as if the storm had seeped through the walls. Outside, lightning flared, briefly turning the rain into streaks of silver needles. And in that flash, she saw the pale figure again, closer now, standing at the porch steps. Its head was tilted too far to one side, like a broken marionette, and its outline seemed to shimmer faintly in the downpour. The next moment, the power flickered back to life for an instant. The overhead light blinked on, only to die again, plunging the cabin into near darkness. In that brief illumination, Jenna caught a horrific detail. Muddy, distorted footprints trailed across the living room floor toward the kitchen, even though she'd locked the doors after returning. Her heart lurched. She realized the intruder hadn't stayed outside. It had been inside with her again. A loud, splintering crack shattered the storm's rhythm. The back door groaned as if something was pressing against it. Jenna held her breath, retreating slowly toward the fireplace. The sound grew, a creak, a push, then silence. She thought for a second it might stop, but suddenly the back door burst inward, slamming against the wall. The wind howled through the cabin, scattering papers and extinguishing the candle. In the doorway stood the figure, pale skin glistening with rain, long fingers hanging unnaturally low, and hollow eyes that seemed almost reflective in the faint firelight. Jenna didn't wait. She swung the poker with every ounce of strength, striking the edge of the doorway as the figure lunged sideways, faster than she expected. The impact echoed like a gunshot against the wood. She bolted toward the front door, tearing the chair away from the handle. Behind her, she heard the shuffle of footsteps and a strange, wet, dragging sound. As she yanked open the front door, a gust of icy rain blinded her. Lightning split the sky again, and for a fraction of a second, she saw not one figure, but two, standing in the yard's edge among the pines. She slammed the front door shut, heart pounding so hard she thought it might drown out the storm. Two of them. The realization hit harder than the rain outside. Whoever, or whatever, they were, they had been circling her all along, moving with intent. As thunder rolled over the hills, Jenna spotted something on the coffee table. Her phone, the screen flickering dimly to life despite the lack of signal. A single notification blinked on the screen. Stop hiding. The message had no sender. Jenna's breath caught as she backed toward the staircase. Poker raised, the storm screaming outside and the knowledge sinking in that she wasn't just being hunted. She was being watched more closely than she'd ever imagined. The cabin seemed to close in on Jenna, the air inside suddenly oppressive and too still. The broken back door rattled on its hinges as the wind gusted through, scattering ash from the dead fireplace across the floor. The notification on her phone still glowed faintly. Stop hiding. She stuffed the useless device into her pocket and tightened her grip on the fireplace poker. If she stayed inside, she'd be cornered. Her only chance might be the forest, a terrifying gamble, but at least she could move. She grabbed her boots and shoved them on, the wet leather cold against her ankles. The front door creaked as she opened it, revealing the storm's fury in full. Rain pelting down in diagonal sheets, trees swaying violently, and the path ahead lit only by flashes of lightning. She didn't look toward the edge of the yard where she'd seen the second silhouette. She couldn't afford to. Instead, she bolted down the gravel path, mud splashing up her legs, the poker weighing heavy in her hand. The forest swallowed her in seconds. The pines towered overhead, their dripping branches forming a skeletal canopy that blocked most of the storm's light. The sound of the rain changed here, becoming a hiss and whisper among the needles. Jenna's breath came in ragged bursts as she ran, occasionally glancing back. Lightning flashed, illuminating two distant figures weaving between the trunks, tall, pale, and deliberate in their pursuit. They didn't run. They didn't need to. Their unhurried pace was worse than a sprint. It told her they believed escape was impossible. She veered off the path, hoping the uneven forest floor and undergrowth would slow them. Branches clawed at her coat, and mud sucked at her boots. She tripped once, catching herself on a low branch, then paused behind a fallen log to listen. The rain masked nearly everything, but faintly, impossibly faintly, she heard something else, a voice. It wasn't loud enough to make out words, but it was unmistakably human, distorted by the storm. It came not from behind her, but ahead, deeper in the forest. Someone, or something, was calling. Jenna hesitated, torn between the unknown voice and the danger behind her. Lightning flared again, and for a split second she saw one of the pale figures closer than she thought. Less than 20 feet away, its head tilted back as if sniffing the rain. Panic surged through her veins. She bolted toward the voice, branches slapping her arms, mud splashing high. Behind her, a new sound joined the rain. Two sets of footsteps moving in unison, no longer slow or deliberate, but quickening, finally giving chase. Jenna's lungs burned as she stumbled toward the faint glow flickering through the sheets of rain. Branches clawed at her clothes, and her boots slipped in the mud, but the promise of another human presence kept her moving. Behind her, the pale figures closed in. She couldn't hear their footsteps over the storm, but every nerve screamed they were there. Lightning flashed again, illuminating a small structure ahead. Another cabin, its single lantern glowing dimly through the mist. She nearly collapsed onto the porch, pounding on the door with the flat of the poker. Please, please let me in, she shouted, her voice breaking. For a long, terrible moment, there was no answer but the storm's relentless roar. Then the door creaked open just enough for a pair of eyes, tired, wary eyes belonging to an older man, peered out. He took one look at Jenna, drenched and trembling, and opened the door wider. Get inside, he said quickly, before they see. The cabin's interior was dim and cluttered, shelves of canned food, a hunting rifle mounted above the hearth, and an old gas lantern flickering on a table. The man, grizzled and weathered, shut the door and dropped a heavy bar across it. You weren't supposed to be out here tonight, he muttered. Jenna clutched the poker and tried to catch her breath. What are they? Who are they? She demanded. The man's jaw tightened. Not who. Not anymore. He glanced toward a window, Where the rain streaked the glass in shimmering lines, he explained in hurried whispers that travelers had been vanishing in these woods for decades. People who'd ignored warnings about storms like this. They don't like the thunder, he said. It makes them show themselves. He wouldn't, or couldn't, explain more. A sudden thump against the outside wall made them both jump. Then came another, on the opposite side of the cabin. The man gestured for silence and reached for the rifle, loading a single round with trembling hands. The window glass nearest the door fogged slightly, as if someone were breathing against it from the outside. Then a single, wet handprint smeared down the pane. Jenna's heart dropped. Lightning illuminated the forest beyond, and she glimpsed not two, but three figures standing in a semicircle around the cabin, their heads all tilted at the same grotesque angle. The man raised the rifle, but before he could fire, the lantern flickered and died, plunging them into a darkness even deeper than the storm outside. The lantern's sudden death plunged the cabin into pitch blackness. Outside, the storm raged harder, the thunder rolling like distant artillery. Jenna's breath sounded loud in the dark, and the older man's whispered curse was barely audible. A faint scraping traveled across the cabin walls, first at the back, then the side, then the front, as if the figures were circling, testing the weak points. Another flash of lightning revealed their silhouettes still stationed outside, unmoving, patient. The rifle's metallic click echoed as the man tightened his grip. "They won't wait long," the man whispered. "The storm keeps them thin, but when the thunder fades," his voice trailed off. Jenna's heart pounded as she strained to hear over the rain. Then a soft, deliberate tap sounded at the window, 3 perfectly spaced raps. The man swung toward the noise and fired. The muzzle flash briefly lit the room, but when the thunder answered, the figures outside hadn't moved. The shot hadn't touched them, or maybe it had, and it didn't matter. Suddenly, a section of the wall groaned under immense pressure. Boards split, and a pale hand, long, jointed fingers bending impossibly, pushed through. Jenna screamed and swung the poker, striking the hand. It recoiled, but the sound of splintering grew louder. The man grabbed Jenna's arm. "The storm's cresting. We run on the next thunderclap," he hissed. Lightning blazed, followed by a deafening crack of thunder that rattled the cabin to its foundations. Seizing the moment, they shoved open the door and bolted into the rain. The forest exploded with sound. The storm at its peak, trees thrashing, and the figures moving faster now. Jenna and the man plunged through mud and brambles, the pale shapes weaving between trees just at the edge of vision. The lantern glow of the man's cabin vanished behind them, swallowed by the storm. Ahead, lightning revealed the faint outline of Jenna's rented cabin through the rain. They sprinted toward it, but as they neared the clearing, a fourth figure emerged silently from the tree line, blocking their path. It was closer, clearer now, its face blank and featureless, but unmistakably human in its posture. Thunder boomed again, louder than ever, and the rain momentarily thickened, creating a curtain between them and the figures. The man fired another round, and the nearest silhouette dissolved like mist under the storm's force. Seizing the distraction, Jenna and the man reached her cabin and slammed the door behind them, barricading it with everything in sight. Then, slowly, impossibly, the storm began to wane. The rain softened to a patter, the thunder faded, and with it, the oppressive presence outside seemed to evaporate. At dawn, when the forest was silent and still, Jenna stepped onto the porch. The yard was empty. No footprints, no handprints, just wet earth and broken branches. She turned to thank the man, but he was gone. On the porch rail, carved into the damp wood, were 3 words etched deep and uneven: "Stay within light."